we are naturally tribalistic, pastors, human beings. We find that we are always trying to create categories of dividing ourselves and separating ourselves. And these categories are mostly for very selfish ends. They always put us on a higher order than the other.
Or sometimes we feel inferior, like people who have grown up in poverty, grinding poverty, tend to feel themselves inferior to others. So that happens. But what happens with the poor is that they see themselves as huddling together. And if you hobnob with the richer, they say, who do you think you are? You think you're better than the rest of us.
Right.
But we do have this categorization where we put ourselves as us versus them.
Yeah, so even when we put ourselves at a lower class, we're actually doing it so that we can condemn the higher class.
Yes. And we don't want anyone from our class to hobnob or to be related to them, or somebody who goes to school and begins to speak in a better language and use better words, like, what do you think you are? Mm-hmm. So that is so true. We tend to have these separation, us versus them, us and others. And Jesus Christ is actually acknowledging that, even in this week's lesson about the least of these.
Because that's a category in itself. It identifies a whole group of people that have been put into this class of the least.
And I would like to say up front that this concept of the least of these is a divine recognition of a human reality. It is not so much that Jesus is saying these are the least. It's simply him acknowledging the fact that in our society, in our world, there is this scale. And there are some people who are at the real bottom of the ladder, so to speak. He is simply acknowledging what we all
that
live.
existent, right?
Yes.
It's an objective reality of a subjective creation.
You could put it that way.
Yeah, something. It's an artificially made category. It does not exist in an objective metric. That if Christ was to look at all of us, he wouldn't divide us into those groups: the least, the best, the worst. For him, the value will be displayed in a very equal sense.
And that is why when the judgment comes in that parable, Matthew 25, about the sheep and the goat, just verse 40, I think, might be a good verse to read.
And that reads, "And the king will say, I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you are doing it to me."
Right. So Jesus Christ, in a rather interesting twist, is saying, you identify me as Lord and Master. When I come in my glory, you want to be identified with me. But I have identified myself with those that you rejected. Are you seeing that?
Yes.
I have identified myself with those that you rejected. Mm-hmm. So in the eyes of God, this least of these doesn't exist in the way we humans have put it. Mm-hmm. And Jesus Christ, by identifying with the lowest, is telling those who put themselves on a pedestal, step down. But he's also telling those of us who have been crushed to step up. And he's sort of
leveling.
Yes.
The playing field. Yeah. And I agree, for me, which is powerful. And it's powerful because it liberates us of this either self-victimization and self-loathing, or just this overly extravagant sense of thinking of oneself as being superior.
True. In fact, Jesus Christ, when he came to earth and he was going to give his manifesto as to what he came to do, Luke chapter 4, 18 and 19, it is interesting what he painted as his mission.
"The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and the time of the Lord's favor has come."
Here's his manifesto, not to hobnob with the elite. He says, those who are well don't need a physician, but the sick do. He said, I have come to seek and to save the lost. I have come to identify myself and to redeem, to lift up the downtrodden. The ones who are up here need to step down, and we see Jesus Christ in his ministry pulling them down a few notches. But he's really come to lift up those whose humanity has been threatened by poverty, by oppression. And I need to say this. Poverty grinds away at your sense of your value and your humanity, especially abject poverty. Not enough money to feed yourself, not enough money to have a decent home, not enough money to pay your light bill or your heating bill in the winter, not enough money to educate yourself, not enough money to take your family out on a vacation, not enough money to do anything, and being treated as less than nothing when you go to the bank for a loan, maybe for your own home, when you go for food stamps, and those social workers speak to you in a sort of disrespectful manner. It grinds away at your sense of your value. Poverty is a crime, as they say. It is a horrible thing to be poor. And to be poor in a way that is thrust in your face and you're faced with it every day. Most of us do not understand what true poverty is, at least not in this country.
Yeah, and you know, the term that I've been coming across, Pastor, lately is this term called economic violence. Because a lot of the poverty that exists in the world, as we keep saying, the scarcity that we see is very artificial. In reality, there is sufficient to feed the world. There's sufficient for everybody in the world to have enough.
Yes. But I like that economic violence. It is to assault the poor and the needy, the least powerful ones of the earth, by withholding from them goods and services so that the prices is jacked up and it becomes outside of your reach. You know, recently I was looking at my cell phone. It's not one of the most standard one. It's decent. It works for me. Recently, it has been malfunctioning. I've had this cell phone about 2.5 years, and I've taken good care of it. Yet it's beginning to malfunction. Do you know why? Because Samsung, and I guess Apple, deliberately create a system whereby you have to always upgrade your phone. From the time they bring out a new iPhone or a new Samsung Galaxy phone with new features that you'll never ever need, it is done in such a way that the one before that begins to
slow down
and glitch. So you have to keep dragging behind them, so to speak, even if you are taking care of your phone. That is economic violence, where you assault people's ability to have the necessities of life by what you do, by your policies, etc.
And forcing them to then now have to strive to receive or to have that which you are offering, because the way you have set up the system is such that that's the only way they can survive. It's to depend on you.
Right. And so when Jesus came to earth, we see in Luke chapter 4 where he mentions his manifesto to his people in Nazareth. But then in the Sermon on the Mount, in his public ministry now, we see in this Sermon on the Mount a condensation of his ministry, of his teaching, the kind of person he came and what he wanted to do. And so when we look at the Sermon on the Mount, we are seeing the essence of what Jesus came to teach and to do. Matthew chapter 5. Just read a few of the Beatitudes first, please.
Yes, and Pastor, even before I jump on there, because there's a thought here that I think really plugs in well at this point. There is this common and then very popular way of referring to our Christian lives and saying we should run our Christian lives by mirroring Jesus Christ, by imitating him, right?
Yeah.
And that takes many forms. You know, is it being holy? Is it being having a certain kind of moral life? But in mirroring Christ in this regard of lifting up the list of this and identifying with the list of this, I don't know if this is a place we go to when we think of the idea of being like Jesus.
The average Christian doesn't. When we think about being like Christ, I would be like Jesus, we are thinking about moral purity, personal moral uprightness, obeying the religious rituals and giving your money to your church, not doing evil and stuff like that. We hardly think about being like Jesus in the context of identifying with the least of these, of ministering to the least of these in the way Jesus Christ identifies himself with them.
Yeah, and that's why even maybe just to take again us back, I was telling you about how when we think of the law and we think about the essence of the law that is given in Scripture, the immediate ideas we turn to are personal. How am I personally, living my life or carrying myself in a way that is upright and sticks to these principles. We are not thinking of what the Scripture will refer to as the more important matters of the law, which are justice, mercy, and faithfulness.
That is so true. And that is why we are really stressing in this season this whole concept of the least of these. What Jesus wants us to understand in terms of our Christian living. And hopefully at the end of the season, our listeners, and we included, will be more intentional about ministering to the poor and needy, and more, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but more assertive in seeking out those who need us. I remember a pastor was with another missionary from a poor country who needed like some computers, etc., to do his work. And he said, Pastor, he asked for prayer. Could you pray with me that God will open the way for me to get these tools, these computers, etc. So he began to pray with the pastor, and as he began to pray, he heard a voice within saying, hypocrite. He's like, well, you are the answer to this prayer. You have 2 computers in your office that you're not using. Why don't you give it to him? Why are you praying when you have
something to share and actually alleviate the pain?
Right. And he said it froze him in that moment, arrested him, and realized, why am I praying for something that I have the answer to it? I am the answer to this man's prayer. So he said, Pastor, let's not pray anymore about this. I have the answer to this prayer. And he gave it to him. And he, in giving this testimony, is saying, many times as Christians, we opt to pray rather than to act. We opt to pray rather than to act. We always look at God as the answer to people's prayers rather than seeing ourselves as the answer to many of those prayers for which we are praying. And I think that is where we are kind of heading with this. To see ourselves as the answer to people's prayers in many situations, and to recognize that if we have the resources, our responsibility is to use those resources to alleviate the pain and suffering wherever it might be, once it comes into our purview.
Yeah, and something powerful happened today in my church, in the class study, because as we're looking through this idea of justice, because whenever we conceptualize of the idea of justice in today's world, it doesn't at all speak to the principles that Scripture is alluding to when it speaks about justice, right? For us, probably we are thinking about the court and some people getting their due, but biblical justice is about each one of us acting in a way that actually serves and seeks to alleviate the pain of the least of these.
Equity would be a good word for justice. Equity, fairness, balancing the scales. Not only in a negative sense that the sinner is punished, but that the innocent is vindicated.
Yes. And not just as a legal matter.
No.
But as an economic.
Which is why in the Bible there's so much about restitution. Like, if you steal from me, it's not enough for the law to condemn me for having stolen. No. It is as if God is saying, what good does it do me if you steal my cow, that you go to jail? I still am without a cow. God says, no, you're going to give me back a cow and then add 1/5 of the value to it for time lost and all of that kind of stuff. So in other words, justice is done because I am compensated for my loss and the scales are now balanced once more. I wish more of our modern systems use that. Instead of sending people to jail where you stole from me and now my taxes keep you and give you 3 meals a day and a warm place in the winter. Sometimes I don't even have money to pay my light bill and my heating bill, and you do. Have you ever gone to the hospital, for instance, and a prisoner comes in? You're in the emergency room. Guess who goes in first?
The prisoner.
Yeah. Because for whatever reason it is. I guess what I'm saying is, in God's eyes, justice is not simply about saying who is wrong. It is also about vindicating the innocent and making sure there is equity and there's fairness.
Yeah, and it's not only, Pastor, even when there has been a crime or there's been this atrocity performed, because even in the story of the Good Samaritan, Pastor, it's very interesting that there's justice there being advanced by a stranger, the Samaritan, to this man who has been robbed.
Right? In other words, there's no court case, but here's a man who has been beaten, who has been robbed, who has been deprived of his means, of even his health, his well-being. So by the Samaritan offering help, taking him to the inn, taking care of him, he has restored a bit of that equality, has restored part of what was taken from this man, especially his humanity.
Even though he was not responsible for the crime.
Even though he was not, I like that point.
Yeah, and that's really why I think even as we do this discussion, we have to really give a good sense of what justice biblically means, which is doing right by another. Not so much because you have done wrong, not so much because you're the one who has taken something from them. Biblical justice is you being responsible for your brother.
But since we're on the Good Samaritan, which is in Luke 10, we're going to come back to Matthew, Luke 10, 25 and 27, 2:27. We can as well stay there for a moment before we move back to the Beatitudes.
25 reads, One day an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question, Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus replied, What does the law of Moses say? How do you read it? The man answered, You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself.
And from there, we go on to the story of the Good Samaritan, because the guy's trying to dodge the bullet. Who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor that I should love? It's okay, let me tell you who's your neighbor. And he gives the story of this Samaritan man. So who is your neighbor? As we ask the question, are they only the white people who live on my block? Or the black people who go to my church? Are they Mexicans? Are they Muslims? Are they Republicans or Democrats? Are they white? Are they black? Who is my neighbor? From the very context of the Good Samaritan, we see a man who is helping someone not of his ethnic or cultural background. Not even of his own race, quote unquote, although they were kind of related. And Jesus is saying, here's a man who steps out of his ethnic bubble, his racial bubble, his religious, cultural, because here's another human being in need of my help. What you were saying before, And so my neighbor, as we all know, is anyone
in need.
Within my purview, within my view, within my influence, my sphere to help. And it doesn't have to be my same race, religion, culture, nationality, any other human being who needs me. Which brings up the question, were the priest and the Levite who passed by, were the bad people?
And then that really comes down to how are we measuring badness in this situation? Because if we are talking about just a sense of moral uprightness, a sense of keeping up with the rituals and the religious requirements, at least ceremoniously, they lived up to those standards.
Right.
But in terms of caring for a neighbor, for the person who's suffering and struggling, they failed.
Why? So the question becomes, what was the problem with what they did or didn't do? And Jesus mentioning a priest and a Levite, he's deliberately contrasting their behavior with that of the Samaritan. And he doesn't judge them. He doesn't say they were bad. He doesn't say they were this. He said they were going to Jerusalem. They were on the street. Yet, they didn't stop. But they are you and I. They are you. They are your church brother, your church pastor. Because so many of us have been busy, too busy to stop. Have you ever been too busy to stop yet, Joel?
Many times.
Maybe going to work. I got to get
Often.
to work. Maybe even ironically going to church and, hey, somebody else will help. The problem with them is they figured somebody else could help and would help because I'm too busy. I've got to get to church. I've got to get to my job. I've got to get where I'm going. Have you ever felt, and this is for all of us, that somebody else could help?
Yes.
Somebody else would help. They were good people. They were religious people in the context of like you and I living and trying to do good. But in the, how should I put it? But in the instance that your religion and your goodness didn't allow them to stop and help someone in need, they failed.
It
like
lost
you were
its
saying.
it lost all its meaning or its essence in terms of why they were even doing it.
Yes.
Because it's supposed to train you to care for those who are the least of these.
And the reason Jesus made the priest and the Levite the same race, religion, and culture of the man wounded, he was trying to erase the sense of, well, I'm a Republican, I hate Democrats. I'm a white person, I hate black people. I'm a black people, and white people don't like black. That kind of, he wanted to remove every other.
Those categories, those.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would justify them not standing. They're not helping. Because under any other circumstances, you're my brother. We would be in one. But in that, their religion, their goodness, didn't capacitate them to stop and help someone. Even
They
at their
closely
own,
identified with.
even at their own peril or their own inconvenience. Like you may get to church late, you may get to work late, and have to talk to your boss. Why are you late today, Amenia? In that your religion didn't allow you to do this. Jesus is saying you have not been neighborly. And oftentimes we excuse ourselves, and I'm just as guilty, maybe far too guilty for this, of thinking there's somebody else who could do this, who would do this. I'm busy, but the guy behind me, he's not as busy as I am. And everybody's passing by thinking somebody else could do it. But the story of the Good Samaritan is telling you and is telling me that somebody
is you.
is you.
Is you.
If you see the need,
Act on it.
yes.
Do something about it.
Who sees the dog has to bury it. You know my saying.
Yes.
Who sees the dog should bury it. Now, so let's go back again to the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to just touch on a few highlights.
God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for Him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. God blesses those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs.
And I would even suggest anyone who's listening to this podcast, going through this a lesson, read all of Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Because there we see Jesus spelling out the constitution of His kingdom. What citizens of the kingdom should be like, what they should do. And He talks about the poor in spirit, the merciful, the meek, the pure in heart, even being persecuted. These were not the people you would normally exalt and put on a pedestal before the world. If you're going to be a king with a kingdom, you'd want the warriors, the powerful, the rich, the wealthy. So Jesus Christ is beginning to show heaven or His kingdom is made up of a certain quality people. People with a certain attitude. He talks about an eye for an eye. He says, Moses said an eye for an eye, but I said, turn the other cheek. That is so unlike what they were like or what we are like. He says, love your enemies. Now, come on. I'm not supposed to love my enemies. He said, yes, love your enemies because that's how the Father is. He loves His enemies. He said, don't judge. Don't judge others, He says. He says, overcome evil with good. Give to the needy. Even your prayers. Pray humbly. Pray not to be seen by others. And all of this could be summed up in that golden rule, Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that was just a start, by the way. To do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because I'm suggesting we should do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Understand your neighbor and treat your neighbor in the way he would like to be treated, to be valued. Because sometimes we treat people how we want to be treated within our context, never even thinking, is this going to fulfill the need that he has? How would he like to be treated? So the Sermon on the Mount represents God's constitution. Why? Because the poor are just like the rich. How are the poor just like the rich?
In this context, it's not about your material wealth. It's about your spiritual essence, your spiritual value.
Yes. Give a poor man wealth, and almost invariably he becomes like the rich man he once condemned when he was poor. Because the selfishness, the us versus them spirit is in the poor as it is in the rich. I think I remember telling you, and we mentioned it in a few seasons back, when the price of a taxi fare went up in Trinidad many years ago. My dad had a big taxi, we call it a maxi taxi. He would lend it to me sometimes, and I would go and hustle a few dollars, And I remember I was quarreling about the fact that these taxi drivers are pirates. They're killing us, Why would they raise the fare? I was really upset to pay this extra money because I thought they were exploiting the poor. Well, I remember my dad lent me his maxi, and I'm driving, hustling some dollars, and the people are coming in and they're paying the new higher fare. And Joel, at no point did I tell people, keep the extra $2.
I don't want to exploit you.
Yeah, I think this is unfair. I didn't. In fact, I was like, wow, this is good. And I realized when I was finished, and even now that I think about it, I was just like them. When it was my turn to receive from the passengers, you bet I wanted every dime they were able to give. Which tells me, therefore, most of the people who say, if I was only rich, I would help all the poor, are only saying that because
they're poor.
They're poor.
Uh-huh.
So Jesus Christ, recognizing the problem is not my lack of wealth. My problem is not that I have a lot of money. My problem and your problem and society's problem is that we are born with this selfish, greedy, self-serving human spirit. And he wasn't going to create a kingdom of poor people who had the same vindictive, vengeful spirit as the wealthy. He's saying, be transformed. And I think when we seek to do good in society, we seek justice and all of that, we also have to bear in mind, Joel, those of us who would seek to help our fellow man and do good, that one of the greatest good that we can do is to help people see their blindness, see their own selfish spirit at work. And I think Jesus Christ never, ever led a revolution against the Romans. He never took an army of downtrodden Jews against the Romans. Not because he couldn't do it, but because he realized that would simply be changing power from one set of sinful hands
to another. Mm-hmm. And it won't really change the hearts of the people.
Yeah, and they would oppress their fellow man just as the Romans did. So he realized to make any real lasting change, we have to change people.
Oh.
We have to change the way they look at life, change their perspective on life. So this racial situation in America will not be changed by legislating, by pumping money into poor neighborhoods. Because some of these very poor people exploit those poorer than themselves when they are made to provide.
The chance, yeah.
Yeah. You have to change people's mindset, how they see life.
Yeah, and Pastor, in a very powerful way, I think that how we think about wealth and where we stand in respect to the wealth, our wealth desires or desires for wealth is very important. Because for many of us, we have come to believe that all our problems will be resolved by a certain amount of wealth.
True. People say it all the time. If I could only win the lotto. Network marketing, that's exactly what they use to promote your product. You would live the life you want to live. No more worries. Can you imagine this sunny afternoon? Look at the house I have. Or, live the life you've always wanted to live. Sell these products, make $1 million. That's what they always use, the lotto. People always think, if I could only be rich and famous, my problems will go away. But your problems just change their face.
Direction and money, in fact, in many cases, will only exponentially increase and make them, that much more visible.
Yes. So if you are insecure, feeling inferior, if you are bitter and angry and depressed as a poor person, becoming wealthy in of itself will not change that. So even when we talk about the least of these, part of what you and I have to do as followers of Christ is to help people understand their true value and their true worth outside of their wealth. No, poverty grinds at you because we live in a society that judges you by your
wealth,
your possession. Oh, look at that person's house. Look at that person's car. Look at that suit he has on. People want to wear Nike sneakers and they want to wear these H&M clothes because it gives them a sense of belonging, of power, of importance. Because poverty grinds you as to think because you don't have wealth, you are worthless, you are less than. So in alleviating the pain and the suffering that Jesus did, there's also need for people to understand who they are. Which brings us to the rich man and Lazarus. You know the story. The rich man ate sumptuously and he would throw like the crumbs to Lazarus, who sat by the door and the dogs licked his wounds. Is it wrong to be rich?
No.
So what was the problem with this story? Why does Jesus use this story as an example of what should not be?
I think it comes back again to this relational aspect of the interpersonal space, because how we engage with people, even when they exist at those lower levels, if we are going to engage with them and really interact with them in a way that further dehumanizes them, that is antithetical to all the principles of what the world should be doing in a believer's hands.
In other words, if I'm going to give you something, but when I give it to you, it reinforces your being one of the least of these, it's not really helping. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
So in other words, if I were to say, Joel seems like he doesn't have a good suit, I Joel like he's coming to church in the same suit every week. Let me give him one of mine. And I look for the oldest, most crumpled up one with a button missing and I give it to you. I have not really helped you. I've further reinforced your sense of being less than. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yes. It's like sometimes going to social services and the way they speak to you sometimes. Some of the hoops you have to jump through to get help from the government, it further drives you into that sense of, man, when you're a poor man, you have no value. So that's one of the problems I see with the rich man Lazarus, as you mentioned. He just gave him crumbs, left him at the door where the dogs licked his wounds, further strengthening or grinding into Lazarus a sense of, I'm worth nothing. Even the dogs come and lick my wounds. So being rich is not bad. Being selfish and uncaring is. And I think this is the real lesson Jesus is bringing out here that we need to emphasize. It wasn't because he was rich. It was because he was selfish and uncaring. Because when someone else had spoken to Jesus, this is Luke chapter 12, he said, Jesus, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me. Jesus says, hey, who sent me here to be a share of wealth between you? I didn't come to be that. He said, besides, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Luke chapter 12. So Jesus is setting it clear now. Your worth as a human being is not in your Lexus, your 5-bedroom house, your 6-figure income. That is not where your real worth is, he's saying. And your selfish spirit that causes you to grab after wealth, to grab as much as you can, is your problem. So he's telling this man, I didn't come here to be an arbiter about money. Because you're grabbing this money from a brother who you say is selfish, is showing up your own selfishness and covetous spirit. Your life doesn't consist in your wealth. So then, who are the least of these? What is this issue of the least of these in God's eyes? What do you think are the two dimensions of the least of these that we need to kind of wind this thing down?
I'll imagine, and even just as we look through the Beatitudes, I was thinking, Pastor, there in that first Beatitude, talking about blessed are the poor in spirit. And I thought that was interesting because when we talk about the list of these, at least in this season's theme, we are talking about more specifically, and I think you insisted on this on the first episode, that it's about the people who are actually deprived of material possession.
Yes.
Right. But there is also a poverty of spirit, a poverty of the wealth of the spirit, the wealth of the divine presence in one's life.
Yes, but somehow I'm thinking Jesus is talking about wealth of spirit and poverty of spirit in this sense. I like your point about the wealth of the Holy Spirit, but when people are rich and powerful, there's a sort of haughtiness, pride of spirit. Like our president who said, I could walk into Times Square, what he said, and I could shoot someone and walk away and no one will stop me. You get a place where you're full of yourself. Jesus is saying that kind of spirit is not the kind of attitude and mindset that gets you into the kingdom. That is not the kind of spirit that makes you blessed of the Father, gives you that peacefulness and that blessedness. But poor in spirit is someone who's humble, who has no airs. People say he's full of airs or wind, spirit and wind. So he's saying blessed are the poor in spirit, those who have no airs about themselves. They're not puffed up like you blow wind into something. Poverty of spirit meaning I don't see myself as better than and greater than and bigger than. And that's a great place to be. To not see yourself as being greater than or better than and comparing yourself with others, no airs about yourself, but simply acknowledging I'm just a fellow traveler on life's pathway. And when it comes to God's graces, I'm poor. When it comes to the gift of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, long-suffering, temperance, meekness, gentleness, faith, I'm poor in these things. That's a great place to start off. Whether you're rich in the world's wealth or poor in the world's wealth, that's a great place to be. And Jesus is highlighting this. So when we talk about the least of these, I don't want readers to start spiritualizing it, because poverty, literal physical poverty, grinds you into the dirt. That's not the kind of poverty Jesus is speaking about here, the poor in spirit. Because you could be rich and wealthy and still be
poor in spirit.
Poor in spirit.
Yeah.
We're talking about someone who it's raining, it's snowing, but I got to go out there and grind out that work. My child is sick and I can't even stay home with my child because I have to eke out this existence at a minimum wage job and pray that my child doesn't light himself a fire at home because I have to leave him. It's about that pressure, that always grinding on eking out a living, always in want, always in need. We don't want to lose that sense of what the least of these means. Because in the world, there is the least of these. The poor, the oppressed, the ones who have no voice. That's a human reality that God acknowledges. It exists in the world. But then there's also a divine perspective. And the divine perspective says, every mountain shall be made low and every valley
raised up. So that there's a level ground.
Mm-hmm. People like to say, at the foot of the cross, it is level. But they say that in a frivolous way that doesn't really understand and recognize what it means. Because these are the same people, if I walk into the church with an MD or a PhD, they will treat me better than that other person. So it shows we don't really understand what we're saying. It is simply God saying your value as a human being does not reside in your education, your possessions, or your position in life. So you might be the least of these on the earth in terms of how people treat you, in terms of what you have. But in the eyes of God, you are valuable. So we want to have that perspective of ourselves when we think about the least of these. Even that poor guy on the street is valuable to God. I'm thinking about these cars that we wind down, Joel. These vintage cars. You've seen them. How beautiful they are. And they cost a lot of money. But do you know some of these cars when the restorer found them, they were nothing more than a piece of junk. Many of these cars have been abandoned, left in some backyard or some place where grass is going through it. The seats are all tattered and broken up. There are no wheels on it. There are no engine. It's a piece of junk, literally. Worth nothing but to the person who has the time, the skill, and the resources to restore it. And these are the same cars that these guys will take lovingly. These car restore guys, they will take this piece of junk, a shell of a car even sometimes, and they'll take it to the shop and they'll pump time, care, resources, and energy, bit by bit, restoring, painting, sanding, making new seats, fixing up the engine, putting chrome in certain parts of it. And then when you see it 6 months later, a year later, it's like, wow. A car that was a piece of junk now worth $300,000 or more. I can't help but think that we are like those cars. The least of these are like those cars. A junk, piece of junk to the wealthy and the powerful in the world. But in the eyes of a loving God who has the time, the skill, and the resources to restore us. And that is the lesson I would like us to take from today. God's attitude towards the least of these is not, here's a piece of junk, only worth sitting in the backyard or to be thrown away. Here is something that I could restore. The beauty that was even surpasses that it had originally. My prayer for all of us is that we will see people in that light, like God will see them. Here is someone that given the right opportunity, the right resources, can be restored.
Thank you for journeying with us through this season and even for listening to this episode. Let Us Go Deeper is an independent ministry, and your contribution are essential to sustaining this journey. Please make any contributions you may to patreon.com/LUGD. That is patreon.com/LUGD.
And if this is your first time, please subscribe. And if you're one of our regular listeners, share the link, invite your friends to listen in, and they too can be blessed by this podcast. Let us go deeper.